This is Hope Matters. My name is Pastor Eric Shafer. I'm the senior pastor at Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Santa Monica, California. And this is Hope Matters. Each week we talk to an interesting person about the theme of hope, because we believe that hope matters. My guest this week is David Ellingson, who is, as he bills himself, I'll read it off the piece of paper here, Dave. Adventurer, author, and speaker. I love that. Adventurer, author, and speaker.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to our viewers is that Dave's and my lives have crossed many times over the last now 30 years in various work in the Lutheran Church. So Dave, welcome to Hope Matters.
Thanks, Eric. Good to be with you. This is, I'm looking forward to the conversation. Glad to reconnect.
Dave, you've done a lot of things in your life. Well, what are the things that you're doing now that are exciting for you?
Oh my goodness. Well, of course, it's the pandemic time, and as you so well said, adventurer, author, and speaker. Much of that has had to adapt to the circumstances of a global pandemic, and I'm my greatest adventure at the moment right now is podcasting. I mean, here you are doing your thing, and I've been doing this now for, oh golly, since last March, and I've done probably 50 or 60 episodes. And I've during this podcast, it just allows me to meet interesting people, to hear their stories. I did a series called Life Journeys. And among the life journeys that I accompanied were such notables as Rick Steves. And Rick is a wonderful human being, great travel writer, public TV host, and Lutheran, and a philanthropist. And Rick's a good friend. He lives literally down the hill from me here in Edmonds, Washington. Another notable Lutheran and world famous epidemiologist, Dr. Michael Osterholm, who is now on President Biden's task force, and who was on Meet the Press the other night, warning about this new virus strain from England. And so I've been enjoying hearing the stories of interesting people, and frankly, I think everybody has a story, and an interesting story. And the communications guy that you have led in many ways, in many places. And so for me, just to listen to these stories and hear what gifts people have and how they're using their gifts has been an encouragement. And your theme, Hope Matters, has brought hope to me during the pandemic. Just one other little kind of hopeful thing that has happened in this series. I'm currently doing a series called The Magic of Music. And I've been a musician all my life and love to sing and play instruments and be a part of ensembles. And so The Magic of Music, I put together a list of interesting musicians, different styles and genres. And so I've been interviewing or having conversations with jazz musicians, blues artists, choral directors, world music people, and getting their stories. How did they journey into the world of music? And then we have a little mini concert. So they perform, they share some of their music. And so currently that's been great fun. And as I sit here in my office with a sign on the door, Grandpa is podcasting. Two of my grandchildren, William, age 4.75, and he would probably calculate that since he's a very precocious, mathematical, scientific little guy. And Addie, who is about 1.5 years, they are in the other wing of our house. And so I would say during the pandemic, being a podcaster and being a papa have been the two highlights. But there's a lot we can talk about, but that gives you a quick snapshot.
So if someone wanted to find your podcast, how could they find it?
Well, probably the best place to find my podcast and my books and films that I've produced is simply at my website, which is D as in David, D Ellingson, ELLINGSON.com. And there's biographical information. There's links to the podcast, the books I've written about my paddle adventures down the Mississippi and the Erie Canal and the fjords of Norway, and a film, actually an award-winning film I produced called Coming Home. That is on there. There are pictures. I love to do photography. So, folks can find their way. And if they're interested, I've been doing lots of Zoom presentations. And so I'm Zooming all over the country, doing things, everything from my adventures in my kayak to actually this weekend, I'm doing a TED Talk and Zooming with the ELCA Youth Ministry Extravaganza, which is being done virtually, that youth ministry world that I lived in for so many years. I'm doing actually a workshop, a TED Talk called Podcasting 101, because I didn't know about podcasting really until a year ago. And I have learned, and for me, learning is what it's all about. I mean, I'm getting up there in my years, but I'm a lifelong learner. And so I Zoom, I'm willing to chat with folks. I'm curious. My grandkids are little scientists, as Jean Piaget would say, and I'm just an older scientist doing little experiments and having fun.
That's great. That's wonderful. Well, good. So tell us a little bit about the books you've written.
Well, way back when I actually did my doctoral dissertation at Claremont School of Theology down your way on holistic health. Back in the day, I was kind of seen as kind of a hippie, holistic health, what is that? And really, I was looking at diet and nutrition and exercise and stress management now, which are kind of in the canon of health. But back then it was kind of unique, and I became a distance runner. I ran marathons and triathlons and ultras, and I was doing a personal experiment on myself to learn how to become more whole and healthy, and wrote a dissertation and a book. And then over the years, I when I taught at the college or was a parish pastor or worked on regional or national projects, I wrote a lot of short pieces, kind of monographs. But since my retirement, or I prefer to say my third act, I have been doing these adventures in my kayak. And so, like I said, down the Mississippi River, 2 months, 2,300 miles, the Erie Canal, Hudson River to the Statue of Liberty, the fjords of Norway. When the pandemic is over, I've already organized an expedition down the Mekong River through Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And each time I do one of these adventures, I write a book. And I've also been producing films. And so that's been a great thing. So those are some of the books. But I've also, given my training theologically and in the world of faith, I wrote a book called Biblical Wisdom for a Digital Age. And it really takes a lot of those sound bites, if you will, from the scriptures and from the Christian and Jewish traditions and faith traditions. And I reflect on what they might mean for today in a digital age. So that was a fun book. And then another book I wrote was called Say What? A Fresh Look at Old Sayings. And I examine kind of, again, within the vernacular, those sayings that your grandmother or somebody said, and they kind of pop up in those moments when when the pandemic began, my mother's voice in my head said, "These things too shall pass." And so I take these phrases and sometimes agree with them, and then sometimes argue with them. Like God works together for those, who love God, or what's the other one? God helps those who help themselves, which I argue with as not being biblical, not really being capturing the heart of God, which actually God helps those who can't help themselves.
Right.
And so that was another book. So, I'm writing a children's book right now, with my grandkids. I love to tell stories, as you and your viewers are seeing. So I'm writing a children's book inspired by my dad and an uncle who used to tell me stories when I was little, and I'm telling stories to them, and it's about a bunch of animals near the ranch our family had in eastern Washington, who work together. There's Grizz the bear, there's Pollyanna Pickerel, there's Wilbur the wolf, there's Cassie the coyote, Pedro the porcupine, Sally the sparrow. They are kind of a community of animals who have life situations and they have to solve them, and they learn how to help each other and be a cooperative kind of community. So I'm noodling on Grizz and his friends, and that should be out in the spring. And I'm already trying it out on William, and he's a tough act because he's kind of a digital kind of kid. And so when I asked him if he wanted to hear a story, he said, "No, Grandpa." And so I put something on my computer, a picture of Grizz, an artist friend is drawing, and he said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, that's from my book." And he said, "Well, tell me more." So I lured him in, and I told him a story from the book, and then I said, "Well, let's go do something else." He said, "No, tell me another." And so, isn't that our challenge? Tell a story, and tell a good story. And how do you lure folks in and listen to each other's stories? And Richard Rohr has a great series recently on the stories. There's my story, there's our story, and there's the story. And how do we listen to each other's stories, see our story as important, but then see that in the larger story of God and the world and all the great faiths. So that's a not a quick
Oh,
but a
that's fine.
snapshot again.
That's fine. I was just thinking as you were saying that my story, our story, and the larger story is also the way back from division too, isn't it?
It is indeed. Yeah,
Listening to each other's stories, even when we disagree, and then finding the common ground.
that's
And
right.
then for us as people of faith, putting that in the larger context of God's story.
Exactly. Yeah. I think a lot of the division we have is because a lot of people, whether they be on the right, left, center, or wherever, feel unlistened to. They feel unheard. They feel unappreciated and ultimately unloved. And therefore they're angry, they're fearful, they're anxious. They haven't learned to look at the larger story and our story. And so they're into kind of the blame game, and they're pointing their finger, and this is kind of what's going on in our country and in our world. And hopefully we can listen to each other's stories even though we may not like always what we hear. How can we be better listeners, and in the process build relationships, build bridges rather than walls, and then take it to that bigger story of our story. And I guess, given your theme of hope, I'm hoping that in this next chapter in our country we can do that.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And praying. Yeah. I mean, as you were talking, I was reflecting on Communications 101, which you and I have both talked about, window and mirror.
Hmm.
We're into a mirror society. You only see things on Facebook that you want to see. You only hear news you want to hear that agrees with you. And
Right.
our lives have been about opening windows.
Indeed. Indeed. Yeah.
It's,
But it's, I think a lot of times people haven't learned that. I mean, we're such a visual society right now with the social media and pictures and images. And so we look at those pictures, and you could say picture or mirror, but how do we look through and listen and get behind the scenes? That's why. So for example, with my music series on my podcast, the magic of music, I want to know, Rachel Kurtz, why are you singing the blues? you know I mean, you do it with such authenticity, it rips my heart out sometimes. But well, she said, I mean, my music, my art, my gift is going deeper and telling my story. And that's part of my story. And so whether it's music or Michael Osterholm, the epidemiologist in my series on life journeys, I knew a little of his story. And of course, you see him on TV, and, people probably agree or disagree with his dire predictions, all of which really have come true, sadly. But as I talked with him, he told me the story about how he grew up in a little tiny rural town in northeastern Iowa, near where my ancestors settled in the 1850s. And he grew up in an abusive home. His father was alcoholic, and he didn't really feel much love and family. But you'll love this, Eric, as a communication guy. The wife of the local editor of the Wakan newspaper took him under wing as this precocious. He loved science. This kid loved science. He loved bugs and loved animals. And so she, who actually had a master's degree, would get these articles for him about this scientist who was kind of a science detective, who explored, how things happened and why, which is, what science does. Science asks that question of how, right? And she gave him these articles, and he was a young kid, and she encouraged him, and he said, she's one of my mentors, she's one of my guides along the way, and that's one of the main reasons here I am now, a of an epidemiologist. I'm trying to find those bugs still. But it began in his story with a mentor, a role model, someone who guided him along the way. And his passion is because he had a dysfunctional family, but the church was a functional family. His community became that kind of functional family and helped him to become really a world leader from this little tiny town in Iowa.
Well, we could talk for a long time, and we've talked about hope for a little bit, but let's kind of bring us back to that, and as our conclusion, Dave. So you've said a little bit about this, but let's focus on it for a minute. So what does give you hope in January when we're recording? It's February. It's February already. Wow. In February of 2021, Dave, what gives you hope?
Well, let me say a little bit about right now, and then maybe the larger
Sure.
story, if you will. Right now, I'm hopeful. In my prayers this morning, I thought about the Republicans who met with President Biden yesterday, and I'm hoping I'm hoping that this is me speaking, that a compromise can be reached. That the Democrats don't have to go it alone, and that we can begin a bipartisan cooperative journey, particularly around the pandemic relief bill. So, and the reason I'm hopeful is because I think President Biden is has been made for this moment. I mean, a lot of people maybe don't like him, but people think he's old and he's an insider, and I take those as positive. He's old. He's an elder.
Yeah.
God bless our elders. I mean, we are them now, right? and experience counts, right? And so he's an elder. He knows the Senate. He knows how to work together. He has been a legislator, a person who knows that compromise and working together is important. He was elected in many ways on that kind of platform and that kind of value, bringing unity. So I'm cautiously optimistic, and I would say hopeful that steps can be made even today and tomorrow and this week towards that. Now, if that doesn't happen, I'm still hopeful because I think we're paying attention to the important stuff, and that the pandemic, the economy is very important, but until this pandemic is under control, the economy is not going to really recover. And it's not an either or; it's a both and. So I believe that this administration and our nation knows. I mean, if you ask the citizens of our nation, they know that this needs to be addressed, and hopefully we can work together and get vaccinated and get things back on track. And so I'm again cautiously optimistic because of who our leadership is now and the values that I see, and our national maybe a wake up call that happened in this election. Um, I'm a pastor and a trained theologian, and the bigger hopefulness I have. I was thinking about this before we got on the connection today, and the passage in John's Gospel, which is my favorite, came to mind. In the beginning was the Word, and it goes on to talk, and the Word was with God, full of grace and truth, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Right. Um, my belief system, my big story says that God is who created everything, the God who is in creation and is continuing to create. To use that old spiritual, got the whole world, the whole cosmos in God's hands, and so I'm cosmically hopeful because that I believe that's the case. And if I look at creation, if I look at sort of a creation-centered theology, and I tend to be a mystical Franciscan at this point. I see that the creation itself renews itself, and we humans are a part of that process. And so, and the Word became flesh. So here's this Jesus dude. Hope matters. I just thought of this when I was showering, literally. Hope, right? Which is kind of this ethereal, kind of wonderful, but it became flesh. It mattered. Matter is matter, right? It's one thing to let the clouds float around, but the clouds produced rain and it lands on us. And Jesus is matter. God, the creator, becoming flesh and dwelling with us, being with us, full of grace. Now, that's important. Grace and truth. Can Are there two more important words right now in our world and in our society, in our country? Then can we be a little more gracious?
More truthful. Yeah.
And more truthful? I mean, there it is, John's Gospel, written millennia ago. Now that's the big story. And I believe that story. And I think anybody, you and I could sit down over a good cup of coffee or some really good single malt scotch, right? And we'd say, let me tell you this story. And they go, oh, I love that story, because that is the story that we need to be telling. And that gives me hope on a, not just a local level and a situation, temporal level, but on a cosmic level.
Very good. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dave, for being with us today. If you'd like to know more about Dave Ellingson and his work, he already mentioned his website, which is his first initial and last name, dellingson.com, where you'll find his books and information on his adventures and his podcasts. And that's a place to look. Dave, so thank you for being with us on Hope Matters today.
My pleasure, Eric. Blessings to you and all the good work you and your people are doing down there in Santa Monica.
Thank you. This has been Hope Matters, a weekly production of Mount Olive Lutheran Church, during which we talk to interesting people from around the community and around the nation and even around the world about the theme of hope, because we believe that hope matters, and we believe we have a God of hope. Thanks for being with us. See you next week.